Under a sky where dying suns bled their final light into the void, the galaxy lay draped in shadow. Star systems that once burned with the brilliance of unbroken empires now whispered into the darkness, their voices thin and fading. The air, if one could call it that, out here, seemed heavy with the memory of wars so ancient they had become myths, their truth buried beneath the dust of millennia. The great banners of a once mighty dominion hung in tattered silence, their colours washed away by the cold hand of time. And at the heart of that fading light stood a single name, one remembered by so few, yet heavy with the weight of 1,000 forgotten oaths. We truly love and care for you, and as we share this story together, you're part of something older than any star we can see. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. They called themselves the Cathonian Ptoriate, the legion that was sent beyond the edge of the known galaxy and never returned. Some say they were lost to the black tide of the warp. Others whisper of betrayal so profound that even their name was erased from the Imperial archives. Yet the truth was far worse. In the beginning, they had been the Emperor's most distant blade. The Primarch they followed, Lord Captain Seraphius Kyle, was unlike his brothers. While the others waged war across compliant worlds in storms of steel and fire, Kyle fought with patience, weaving a tapestry of alliances, pacts, and unbreakable loyalty. His armor, forged in the dawn of the Great Crusade, was the color of midnight waters, traced with runes older than terror itself. His face, pale and severe, betrayed none of the storms that churned within him. But within him they raged. Kyle's curse was his vision, for he saw further into the tides of the future than even he wished. In the quiet between campaigns, when the fleet drifted in the silent black, he would stand before the great observation decks and watch the stars move in their slow dance. He had seen their deaths, those stars, long before they came to pass, and in their fading light, he saw his own end. It began on the world of Carthay Primus, a desert moon whose oceans had long since boiled away under the gaze of its merciless sun. The Legion had been ordered to pacify its warring tribes and bring them into the Imperial fold. But the order came with strange conditions. No orbital bombardments, no exterminations, no acts that would sully the delicate balance the administratum wished to preserve. Kyle obeyed, though the restriction cost him time, and time was the one resource the Great Crusade could not spare. It was during the final siege of Carthay's capital that he received the first message. It arrived as a fragment carried by a Mechanicum cipher vessel whose crew had all died before docking. The words were few, but they burned into Kyle's mind like a brand. The Emperor will not recall you. The stars you die beneath will not know your name. He did not share the message with his captains. He buried it deep within his private logs, as if secrecy could rob it of its power. But in the days that followed, the thought would not leave him. It lingered in the way the astropaths avoided his gaze, in the strange silences that filled the vox channels when terror spoke, and yet duty demanded he move forward. When Carthay finally bent the knee, the victory felt hollow. The tribes, though pacified, looked upon their new imperial masters with eyes of sand and stone, unmoving, unfeeling. The Praetoriate made ready to depart, expecting the next orders from Terra to guide them further along the Emperor's grand design. Instead, they received only a set of coordinates that led into the halo stars, a region so far beyond the Emperor's light that even the most seasoned navigators whispered of it in fear. Kyle called his council in the vigil of midnight, the flagship that had carried them through 100 conquests. The chamber was lit only by the pale blue glow of tactical hololiths, their shifting constellations painting his features in ghost light. "This is not a campaign," his first captain, Morvain, said at last. "This is an exile." Kyle did not answer immediately. His eyes traced the map, the infinite scatter of points beyond which no chart returned. "And yet," he said, "we go." Some would later say that this was the moment his fate was sealed, that by obeying the command without question, he walked willingly into the jaws of whatever darkness lay ahead. Others believed he already knew there was no turning back. The fleet burned toward the halo stars. Weeks became months, and months became a measure of madness as the navigators wrestled with storms in the warp that defied all precedent. Time unraveled in strange ways. Men would swear they had just spoken to a comrade, only to find him years older the next day. Stars flared and died in the same breath. The legionaries whispered of strange shapes moving between the ships, shadows that drifted too slow to be alive, yet too deliberate to be mere phantoms. Kyle felt the weight of each passing moment. His visions became sharper, more insistent. In his dreams, he saw the faces of his warriors, not as they were, but as they would be, frozen in death among the wreckage of a fleet that history would never record. And somewhere, beyond the veil of the warp, he felt a presence watching. It was on the 172nd day of their passage, when the first ship vanished. The Iron Reliquary, a strike cruiser with 1,000 souls aboard, was there one moment and gone the next. No alarms, no distress calls, just gone. The fleet searched for days, but the void gave nothing back. Morvain confronted him then, in the private sanctum of the vigil. "This is not the Emperor's will," he said, voice low but edged with fury. "Something else guides us. If we turn back now, we can." Kyle's hand slammed onto the war table. "And disobey?" he said. "We swore an oath, Morvain. You swore it to me. Not to die in the dark for nothing," Morvain hissed. Kyle stared at him for a long time, and in that silence, the distance between them, the bond of brotherhood forged in blood and fire, began to crack. Days later, the fleet broke the edge of the charted galaxy. Before them lay a gulf so black it seemed to drink the light from their hulls. No stars, no worlds, only an endless ocean of night. And somewhere, deep within it, the echo of a promise or a curse whispered in Kyle's mind. "You will not return." The gulf swallowed them whole. For the first time in the long history of the Cathonian Ptoriate, there was no sense of bearing, no comfort in the pinprick constellations that had always been their silent companions. The void here was unnatural, too absolute, too still, as if it were not the absence of light, but the presence of something greater and more ancient than the stars themselves. The warp storms, so violent in the preceding months, faded into a dead calm. Even the ship's machine spirits seemed to whisper more softly, their hum muted like a cathedral after the faithful have fled. Kyle walked the vigil of midnight's central spine alone that night, his heavy boots ringing against the adamant floors. The ship was quiet, save for the distant groan of hull plating under unnatural pressure. Each sound seemed amplified in the silence, like a whisper echoing in an empty tomb. He stopped at the viewing gallery, an expanse of armored crystal that faced the endless dark. Here he thought of the Emperor, not the golden figure the remembrances painted in their myths, but the man, if man he truly was, who had looked each of his sons in the eyes and given them their purpose. He tried to remember if, in those first days, there had been any sign in the Emperor's gaze that he might one day send his own son to vanish into the dark. Footsteps approached. Morvain entered the gallery, helm under his arm. He had aged since the crossing began, though Astartes were meant to be untouched by such things. Lines had carved themselves at the corners of his eyes. His voice, when it came, was quieter than Kael had expected. 4 more ships have reported power fluctuations. The Iron Reliquary was the first, but Kael, it will not be the last. Kael did not answer, keeping his eyes fixed on the void. Morvain's jaw tightened. You think I do not know what they whisper? That the Emperor abandoned us? That we are a weapon cast away once the war was nearly won? Even your own captains, Kael turned to him sharply. They are my captains, because I keep them focused on the oath we swore. If I let them believe we have been abandoned, the Legion will fracture before we reach whatever lies ahead. Morvain took a step closer. And if we have been abandoned, will you march us to our deaths just to prove your loyalty? Kael's eyes narrowed, but before he could answer, the gallery lights flickered just once before returning to their steady glow. It was enough to silence them both. The days that followed were marked by unease. The ships of the fleet seemed wrong. Corridors stretched further than they should. Voices echoed in places with no one to speak them. Legionaries who had served together for centuries began to keep their distance, glancing over their shoulders as if they expected to see a stranger in familiar armor. The tech priests offered no comfort. Their binaric chants grew fractured, occasionally dissolving into bursts of static, as though some deeper logic was overwriting their minds. On the 189th day, the astropath screamed. Kael was in the strategium when the wails began, high, thin notes of agony that stabbed through the bulkheads. He ran, Morvain at his side, to the astropathic choir chamber. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, and the walls seemed to breathe with each tortured cry. The astropaths lay writhing in their harnesses, their sightless eyes wide, mouths shaping words that did not belong to human tongues. Only one phrase emerged clearly, repeated again and again. You are seen. You are known. You are claimed. And then, as one, they fell silent. The chamber lights died, plunging them into blackness. That night, Kael gathered his senior officers. The hololith between them displayed not the comforting map of the fleet's trajectory, but a shifting distortion, a single point of darkness moving against the static of the void. It follows us, said Master of Censors Vireth, his voice trembling despite his gene-forged composure. No matter our change in heading, it remains the same distance away. A ship? Morvain asked. Vireth shook his head. If it is, it gives no energy signature, no reflection of light. It is as though the void itself watches us. Silence filled the strategium. Kael's mind turned, unbidden, to the fragmentary message he had hidden away. The Emperor will not recall you. Was this the reason? Was this the thing he had known, waited beyond his light? Weeks passed. The darkness in the astropath's chamber never lifted. Ships began to report missing personnel, lone sentries vanishing from their posts, entire maintenance crews gone between rotations. Search parties found nothing, but occasionally they would hear faint tapping from within the walls as though someone were trying to get out. Morvain came to Kael again, more desperate now. We cannot keep moving toward this. We must turn back, Kael, before there's nothing left to command. Kael stared at him, and for a moment he almost said yes. But something deep within, a sense of inevitability, or perhaps the final embers of obedience, held his tongue. No, he said. We see this through. The breaking point came on the 233rd day. Without warning, the vigil of midnight's alarms screamed, and the entire fleet dropped from the warp. Before them hung a world, if it could be called that, suspended in the abyss, like a wound in reality. It was vast, but its surface shifted as though it were liquid, a roiling mass of black and crimson swells. There were no stars around it, only the presence they had felt in the dark, now close enough to breathe into their lungs. The darkness pulsed, and every vox in the fleet came alive with a single voice, deep, resonant, and inescapable. Welcome, sons of the forgotten. You have crossed the threshold, now. You belong to me. Kyle felt something stir in his chest. Fear, yes, but also a terrible recognition. This was what they had been sent to find, or perhaps to feed. The black-red world loomed before them, its surface shifting like a sea trapped under a dead sky. There was no horizon, only the endless churn of its form, broken by the occasional rise of mountainous swells that collapsed back into the hole. No light touched it, and yet it was visible, outlined against the void by a sickly radiance that seemed to come from within. On the vigil of midnight's command dais, Kyle stood motionless. His captains waited for his order, but the voice they had all heard still rang in the air, heavy as iron chains. None dared to speak first. Morvain broke the silence. This is not a world, Kyle. This is a grave. Kyle's eyes did not leave the writhing surface. If it is a grave, he said quietly, then it is the grave we were sent to dig. No order to retreat came. Instead, the fleet formed a slow approach, hulls trembling as they crossed into the unseen sphere of influence that clung to the world like a shroud. Instruments failed first, auspex, vox, sensorium arrays, all going blind, one by one. Then came the cold. Not the absence of heat, but a deeper chill that sank into the bones, as though the life was being pulled gently, inevitably, away. Shuttle teams were readied. Kyle would lead the first descent. The surface, if it could be called that, was unlike any they had known. The shuttles touched down on something that looked solid only from the air. Up close, the ground shifted under their boots, not quite liquid, but never still. It yielded slightly to their weight, rippling outward in slow waves. Beneath the translucent black lay moving shapes, pale, human-like forms that twisted and turned as if caught in the grip of an eternal current. The air was thick, almost oily. Every breath tasted of copper and ash. The horizon was featureless. No landmarks, no structures, only the endless swell of the surface. And yet, Kyle felt watched from every direction. They advanced in formation, bolters held ready, though there was nothing to shoot at. The only sound was the slow pulse of the ground beneath them, like the heartbeat of something vast and buried. An hour into the march, they found the first structure. It was a spire, impossibly thin, rising at least 100 meters into the air, its surface smooth and black as polished obsidian. It bent slightly, swaying with the movement of the ground, but never broke. At its base lay a single opening, framed in jagged sigils that pulsed with dull red light. Kyle approached. As he stepped into the threshold, the light flared. His vision twisted. For an instant, he stood not on the black-red world, but on terror itself, beneath the golden light of the Imperial palace. The Emperor looked down at him, not with pride or love, but with something colder, something final. The vision broke, and Kyle was back in the spire's shadow. Inside, the walls were lined with reliefs, scenes of war, conquest, and judgment. But these were not imperial victories. They showed the fall of nameless empires, their rulers kneeling before towering shapes that were neither man nor Xenos. And always, in the background, a dark ocean surged beneath a black sky. At the spire's center lay a dais, upon which rested a single object, a helm ancient beyond reckoning. It was shaped for a warrior's head, but its surface was etched with the same sigils as the doorway, each line pulsing faintly. Kyle reached out, not to take it, but to touch it. The instant his gauntlet brushed the surface, the voice returned. You have come, as all must come. The oath you swore was not to him, but to the truth beneath him. I am that truth, Kale froze. Around him, his warriors shifted uneasily, their weapons twitching toward the shadows, though nothing moved. The Emperor feared this place, the voice continued, feared what I would show his sons. So he cast you away, as he will cast them all. But you are here now, and you will see. Images burned in Kale's mind, visions of the Imperium's future. Worlds burning, legions turned upon one another, the throne itself cracked and bleeding light. He saw his brothers, the other Primarchs, broken, dead, or worse. And above it all, the same black-red tide, swallowing the stars. The vision left him gasping. Morvayn was at his side, gripping his shoulder. Kyle. What did it show you? Kyle looked at him, eyes hard. The truth, he said. And the truth is, the Emperor has already betrayed us. There was no ceremony when he lifted the helm from the dais and placed it upon his head. But the air in the spire shifted, the pulse of the ground growing stronger, almost eager. The voice spoke once more, not to Kale alone this time, but to every warrior present. Kneel and be remade. Stand and be unmade. One by one, the warriors of the Cathonian Ptoriate knelt. Even Morvayn hesitated only a moment before lowering himself. The ground's pulse matched their heartbeats. When they rose, the black-red world no longer felt alien. It felt like home. In orbit, the rest of the fleet waited for orders that would never come. Transformation was not instant. It began subtly, like a sickness that carried no fever. Changes small enough to be ignored until they could no longer be denied. When Kyle returned to the vigil of midnight, the helm remained upon his head. It was not fused to him, but none dared to see what would happen if it were removed. The sigils on its surface pulsed in time with his heartbeat, though sometimes they seemed to beat in a rhythm all their own. His voice had deepened, carrying an undercurrent that resonated in the bones of those who heard it. Even his shadow no longer matched his form precisely. It lingered on the walls a moment longer than it should, moving just slightly when he stood still. Morvayn noticed it first among the legionaries. Their eyes were changing, faint rings of crimson around the irises, visible even through helm lenses. Their movements became unnervingly synchronized, not with the drilled precision of Astartes, but as though they all followed the same unspoken thought. Casual speech became rare. Conversations were replaced by long silences, punctuated by a few murmured words that made no sense to those outside the circle. The fleet's Mechanicum detachments were the first to voice concern. Magos Treval, a veteran of centuries, requested a private audience with Kyle. What passed between them in that chamber was never recorded, but when Treval emerged, his mechadendrites trembled, and his binary streams were riddled with static. He returned to his quarters and was not seen again. His tech priests, one by one, fell silent in their rituals, their chants shifting to strange cadences that the ship's machine spirits seemed to obey without protest. Within weeks, the fleet no longer resembled an imperial force. Imperial Aquilas were removed from armor and hull plating, replaced with the shifting sigils of the black-red world. Vox hails from the outer ships ceased. Instead, orders spread in whispers, carrying from mouth to mouth without official transmission. Kyle moved through it all like a man walking a path he had always known. Morvain, though changed, still wrestled with doubt. He found himself one night in the Vigil's observation gallery, staring at the black-red world below. The surface still shifted endlessly, but now he could almost make out patterns in its movements, spirals, waves, shapes too vast to comprehend. "You are still thinking, like a soldier of the Emperor." Cale's voice came from behind him. Morvain turned. Cale's helm glowed faintly in the dark. "I am still his soldier," Morvain said, though the words sounded hollow even to him. Kyle stepped beside him, looking down at the world. "He sent us here to die. But this place has shown me what lies beyond death. What lies beyond him. You believe this thing?" Morvain's tone was sharp, but it lacked conviction. Kyle turned his helm toward him. "I have seen the Imperium's end, Morvain. The throne will break. The stars will drown. You can cling to loyalty and be swept away with it. Or you can stand beside me and be remade into something that cannot fall." Morvain hesitated only a moment longer before he bowed his head. The next stage of change began the day Kale ordered a full planetary descent, not to explore, but to offer. Prisoners from the Carthai campaign, still held in the fleet's vaults, were herded into shuttles. They screamed and cursed as they were forced onto the black-red surface, their voices fading as the ground swallowed them whole. The pulse of the world grew stronger, reverberating through the hulls of the ships above. After that, the transformations accelerated. Armor warped subtly, edges curving in ways that followed no human smith's design. Voices deepened, footsteps grew heavier, and a strange, almost metallic sheen began to creep across bare skin. In battle drills, the legionaries struck harder, faster, their blows carrying a weight that cracked ceramite. But the most unsettling change came in the fleet's dreams. It began with a few reports. Warriors waking with visions of vast cities beneath black oceans, of colossal shapes moving in the deep. Then it spread. Soon, everyone dreamed of the same thing. A figure of impossible size, its form hidden in shadow, watching them with eyes like suns eclipsed. It spoke no words, yet its meaning was always clear. Soon. Kyle held council only once more, before all pretense of imperial discipline was abandoned. In the strategium, with Morvain and the remaining captains, he declared the Cathonian Ptoriate reborn. No longer a legion of the Emperor, they were now the children of the Abyss, bound not by gene or oath to terror, but by the will of the voice beneath the black-red tides. Some captains balked. They never made it back to their ships. The ground took them before their brothers' eyes, dragging them into the depths without a sound. The rest knelt. From that day, the fleet no longer orbited the black-red world as an outsider. They became its vanguard. And in the endless dark beyond, something answered their change. Lights began to appear in the void, not the steady glow of stars, but cold, flickering beacons, moving closer with each passing day. The voice spoke again to all of them at once, and this time there was no mistaking the command. "You will bring the others to me." The void beyond the black-red world was no longer empty. The beacons drew nearer, each one flickering with a light that was wrong, as if whatever burned there was not fire, but the glow of something dying. The augurs could not identify them, but the patterns of their movement were deliberate. A slow tightening, like the closing of a hunter's net. Kyle stood at the command dais of the Vigil of Midnight, helm in place, his voice calm as the dark itself. "They are coming to us," he said. "We will meet them halfway." Morvayn gave the order without hesitation. The fleet moved in silence, not the silence of stealth, but of ritual. The children of the abyss no longer needed to coordinate by vox. They moved as if guided by one mind. In truth, they were. When the first of the lights drew close enough to resolve on Auspex, it was revealed not as a starship, but as a derelict, a vast freighter of pre-imperial design, its hull torn open in multiple places, drifting without power. The light came from within, a pale, almost milky radiance spilling from its wounds like blood from an open vein. Kyle ordered boarding. The assault pods struck the freighter's flank with a hiss of mag seals. The first squads moved in, bolters held low. Inside, the ship was silent, but for a faint dripping, like water in a cavern. The air was heavy with a smell that made mortal crew gag and Astartes pause. Salt, iron, and something sweet, cloying in the back of the throat. The corridors were slick, not with oil, not with blood, but with a thin layer of translucent fluid that clung to armor and skin. Through it, movement could be seen. Tiny shapes writhing, not quite worms, not quite fish. They recoiled from the touch, but never far. In the cargo holds, they found the crew. They stood upright, perfectly still, eyes closed. Each one was coated in a thin film of the same translucent substance, their mouths slightly open as if whispering. When approached, their eyes snapped open, black, shot through with faint rings of crimson, and they moved with sudden, unnatural speed. The battle was short, brutal, and left no survivors. The crew did not fight to live, only to delay. When the last body fell, Kyle entered the hold. He walked among the dead, his gauntleted fingers brushing the glistening surfaces. The helm's sigils flared, and the voice filled the minds of all present. These are mine. They came before you, and they were faithful. Their gift is your path. The freighter's navigation logs were recovered, though they were corrupted beyond mechanicum repair. Still, one fragment remained, a star map leading deeper into the uncharted void, to a cluster of systems long erased from Imperial records. Kyle returned to the vigil, his course already decided. The fleet turned toward the hidden cluster, the black-red world fading into the distance behind them. But its presence did not fade. In dreams, in the spaces between thoughts, they still felt the pull, the hunger. Days into the journey, the prey appeared. A lone Imperial charting vessel, the glory of Saint Veron, crossed their path. It was small, lightly armed, and carried a crew of hundreds, mostly surveyors and Navi's apprentices. It had no chance. The children of the abyss fell upon it like wolves. Boarding torpedoes punched through its hull before distress calls could be sent. Kale himself strode through its central corridor, his warriors fanning out in perfect formation. There was no need for orders. They knew what he wanted. The survivors were driven into the mess hall, a vast chamber now echoing with terrified breaths. Kyle removed his helm. The glow of its sigils reflected in the wide, horrified eyes of the crew. "You have wandered beyond the Emperor's light," Kyle said. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying an unearthly undertone. "And now you will see what lies in the dark." At his signal, the ground began to move. Not the ship's deck, the ground itself, black and slick, rising from the corners of the room. It swallowed the first screaming surveyor whole, dragging them into nothingness. The rest followed, their cries muffled as they were taken. By the time the ship was scoured, only the children of the abyss remained aboard. The vessel was stripped of fuel and left to drift, its empty corridors echoing with the faint pulse of the black-red tide. When the fleet resumed its journey, Kyle stood alone in the strategium, staring at the star map fragment. The path ahead was clear now, not because of the coordinates, but because he could feel it. The prey was not the goal. The goal was the gathering. The voice spoke to him alone that night. Each soul feeds the tide. Each offering strengthens the abyss. You will bring them all. Kyle did not sleep after that. And in the darkness between the stars, more beacons began to flicker. The void ahead was not still. It rippled, not like water, but like a shadow moving across something older than stars. Every time Kyle stood at the viewing ports of the vigil of midnight, he could see it now, a faint distortion that stretched from one end of the cosmos to the other. No mortal eyes could have noticed it, but his senses, sharpened by the voice, drank it in as if it were more real than the steel beneath his boots. The fleet had entered the dead cluster. These were nameless systems, their designations erased from imperial charts centuries ago. The first world they came upon was little more than a broken husk, its surface blackened and split, the remnants of cities lying in neat, impossible rows. Whatever had destroyed them had not been war, but something deliberate, a hand arranging bones into patterns. On that dead world they found the others, not loyalists, not traitors, not even renegades. These were remnants, splinter groups of once proud legions, long thought destroyed in the fires of the heresy, an entire war band of iron warriors, their armor rusted to a dull brown, a splinter of the Emperor's children, their colors dulled, but their eyes fever bright. Even a score of world-eaters, breathing heavily, chain axes idle, watching everything with a predator's patience. They had all come to the same place. Kyle walked among them without hesitation. There was no challenge, no tension. They parted for him, as if the abyss itself had whispered his name into their ears. He found their leaders waiting in the ruins of what had once been a planetary governor's palace. An iron warrior in ancient cataphracti plate greeted him first. His voice was the grinding of stone. You heard it, too. Kyle inclined his head. The voice! A hollow laugh came from the Emperor's child, her armor flaring with faded gold. It told us to wait, said a gathering was needed before the tide could break. Kale's eyes swept over them. Then we will gather. For 3 days, they remained in orbit above the dead world. Raiders were sent to the nearby systems, dragging in more lost warbands and renegade fleets. Each one came willingly, as if the summons were irresistible. It did not matter what gods they served, or if they served none at all. The voice spoke, and they obeyed. On the 4th day, the sky changed. A light bled across the firmament, not from any sun, but from the very fabric of the void. It was the same black-red hue as the tide that had first risen on that forsaken world months ago. It pulsed once, and every warrior on the planet fell to one knee, not in worship, in submission. The voice filled the air, audible now to all. You are the edges of my spear. You are the teeth of my maw. Together, you will devour. In that moment, Kale understood. This was no alliance. This was a consumption. The abyss did not unite. It absorbed. Every warband here was being pulled into something far greater, their wills dissolving into a single hunger. That night, Kyle walked alone through the ruins. He found the World Eater champion sharpening his chain axe, the sound rasping in the wind. Without looking up, the berserker spoke. It's in my head now. Can't hear the nails anymore. Only Kyle said nothing. When the dawn came, if the faint red glow of the abyss could be called dawn, the gathering was over. Hundreds of ships hung above the dead world, their weapons silent, their engines burning toward a single point in the darkness. The voice had given them a target, a living imperial sector, untouched, rich with life and faith. It would be the first offering. Kyle returned to the vigil, his helm sealed with a hiss, his armor's sigils burning bright. As the fleet engaged warp drives, the distortion in the void grew stronger. He could see it clearly now, the shadow of something vast, moving closer with each system they burned. And for the first time, Kyle wondered if the Abyss planned to stop at the Imperium. The imperial sector of Virelia had known only peace for nearly 1,000 years. It was a small cluster of worlds, merchant-rich, lightly defended, and far from the great theatres of war. Its governors traded in silks, in starborn wine, in the songs of crystal-winged birds from their pleasure moons. They believed the Imperium's wars were a distant thing, carried out by soldiers on far-flung frontiers. They were wrong. The fleet came out of the warp without warning. Hundreds of ships, a black armada that blotted out the light of the sector's suns. Kyle stood at the command dais of the Vigil of Midnight, watching the hololithic projections as one Imperial patrol frigate after another was vaporized in sheets of incandescent fire. There were no warnings sent, no calls for surrender. The voice had not commanded negotiation, only annihilation. The first world to fall was Ardentium. Its spire cities rose like blades from the surface, their peaks glimmering with gold. Kyle led the assault himself. He moved through the streets in a storm of bolter fire, his warriors breaking the city's defenders in hours. The civilians fled into the hab tunnels, only to find them already filled with the Abyss's chosen. Pale, eyeless things birthed from the distortion in the void. They swarmed and they fed. Kyle did not watch the slaughter. His eyes were fixed on the sky, where the red-black wound in reality pulsed brighter than ever. He could feel it watching through him, using him. By the second day, 3 worlds burned. By the 4th, the fleet had cut a path into the heart of the sector. Every battle was the same. Resistance shattered in hours, cities reduced to rubble, and then the feeding. The voice demanded no prisoners, no slaves. It demanded emptiness. But on the 5th day, the voice spoke to Kyle alone. The blood is not enough. I require the heart. The meaning was clear. The capital world, Virelia Prime, still stood. Unlike its merchant cousins, Virelia Prime was a fortress world, ringed with orbital batteries and shielded by an entire battle fleet detachment. Its governor was a devout servant of the Emperor, and its cathedrals blazed with the light of the Astronomicon. To the Abyss, it was not just prey. It was an insult. The War Council met aboard the Vigil. The Iron Warrior commander proposed a slow siege, grinding the fortress into dust. The Emperor's child wanted to shatter morale by broadcasting the screams of the planetary governor's family across the Vox. The World Eater said nothing. He simply licked the teeth of his chain axe. Kyle rejected them all. We go in one blow, straight to the heart. If we give them time, the Imperium will answer. The others bristled, but none argued. They had all begun to hear the voice constantly now, an endless whisper under their thoughts, twisting their wills toward Kyle's command. It was no longer just summoning them, it was binding them. The assault on Virelia Prime began in a maelstrom of fire. The Black Armada tore open the planet's orbital defenses in less than an hour, the shields failing under a coordinated barrage so precise it was almost surgical. Drop pods rained onto the surface, smashing through cathedral roofs and fortress walls alike. Kyle's boots struck the marble floor of the Grand Basilica, bolter in hand, as the air filled with the clash of chainswords and the screams of dying clergy. His warriors advanced without pause, slaughtering everything in their path until they reached the Sanctum of Light, the chamber where the great choir of psychers sang the Emperor's name into the Imperium. The choir never stopped singing, even as Kyle cut them down, one by one. Their voices bled into choked gasps, and the Astronomican's faint glow over the planet began to dim. When the last Psyker fell, the distortion in the void above Virelia Prime split. Something vast moved behind it. Not a ship, not a god. A shape without definition, without end, pouring itself into the real space wound like a tide of thought and hunger. The air thickened, the sky blackened. Every warrior in the basilica dropped to their knees, whether willingly or not. The voice filled them all. The heart is mine. The blood is mine. You are mine. Kyle felt it pass through him, like cold water and molten metal at once. He had thought himself the chosen wielder of the Abyss's will, but in that moment he knew the truth. He was not the hand that held the spear. He was part of the spear. When the thing withdrew, Virelia Prime was silent. Not burning, not shattered. Silent. Every man, woman, and child was gone. Only the echo of their presence remained, a hollow resonance in the stones. Kyle returned to the vigil. His armor was slick with blood, his mind hollowed. The others celebrated, roaring victory oaths, but Kyle did not join them. He stood at the viewing port, watching the wound in reality close again, leaving nothing but stars. The voice did not speak to him again that night. The fleet drifted in the dark between worlds. The destruction of Virelia Prime had not brought celebration, not truly. The other warlords feasted on what plunder they had taken, relics stripped from cathedrals, gold and marble hacked from palace walls. But their eyes were restless. The voice had been silent for days, and silence from such a thing was never safety. Kyle kept to the vigil of Midnight's strategium, poring over astropathic intercepts. Imperial forces were stirring, not to avenge Virelia, but to prepare for something greater. The pattern of their fleet movements was wrong. It was not pursuit. It was containment. They were forming a ring, sealing off entire warp routes, cutting away sectors like a surgeon isolating an infection. The abyss was the infection, and Kyle was its knife. He told himself that the campaign was still his to direct, that the voice's silence meant trust, but doubt gnawed at him. When he closed his eyes, he felt that vast, shifting presence again. It had not left after Virelia Prime. It was inside every vessel, every warrior, every moment of stillness. The Iron Warrior came to him first. The warlord's armor was pitted and scorched, his voice a rasp of broken vox grills. "We should strike at the nearest naval depot before they tighten their noose," he said. "Destroy their reserves, and they will weaken." The Emperor's child disagreed, arriving only hours later, perfumed and smiling. "No," she purred, "we strike their hearts again. Another shrine world, perhaps. The sound of their grief is sweeter than their blood." The World Eater didn't come to talk at all. He simply dumped a severed officer's head at Kale's feet and grinned. The implication was simple. Attack something now. But Kale's thoughts were elsewhere. He had begun to study the sectors not yet touched by the Abyss's war. They were rich, yes, but poor in strategic value. And yet, the voice had marked them on the maps in his mind. He did not remember placing those markers, but there they were. That night, the voice returned. "You will go to Carthos." Carthos was nothing, a backwater agri-world, feeding nearby forge planets. It had no great cathedrals, no fleets, no armies. The order made no sense. Kyle asked why. The voice did not answer. It simply pushed. When the fleet arrived, Carthos did not resist. The planetary militia barely fired a shot before throwing down their arms. The governors surrendered without condition. Kyle walked into their audience chamber expecting an ambush. but found instead a hall filled with kneeling farmers and priests, their heads bowed. One of them, an old man with milky eyes, spoke. "We have been waiting for you." Kyle felt the air shift. This was no submission. This was anticipation. The old man led him into the heart of the planet, down beneath the soil, through caverns older than the Imperium itself. The walls were carved with patterns Kale recognized from dreams, from the formless depths of the warp wound. At the center of the chamber stood a throne of black stone, carved from a single monolith that seemed to swallow the light around it. "This is the seat of hunger," the old man whispered. "It was built before the stars learned to burn, and it waits for its master." Kale stepped forward, and the voice roared. "Sit!" He fought the command for all of a heartbeat. Then his legs moved without him. The stone was cold, but as soon as he touched it, the temperature surged, heat and ice all at once, flooding his veins. The world around him blurred. He saw the galaxy as the abyss saw it, not as stars and planets, but as a feast laid upon an endless table. Every living mind shone like a candle, and the abyss desired them all. Not just the Imperium, not just its enemies, all of it. Eldar craft worlds, Orc empires, the swarming hives of the Tyranids, even the realms of the Chaos gods themselves. The abyss was not their servant. It was their predator. The vision faded. The old man was gone. The throne was empty beneath him. Kyle stood alone in the chamber, but something inside him had changed. The voice no longer spoke in commands. It spoke in certainty. "You are my herald. You will open the way." Kyle understood then. Every war so far had been a test. The true war had not yet begun. The Imperium was merely the first lock to be broken. When he emerged from the depths, the other warlords waited, their impatience simmering. They demanded to know why they had wasted time on a worthless agri-world. Kyle only smiled. Because this was not conquest. This was preparation. None of them noticed that, in the darkness behind his eyes, something else was smiling too. The wound in the galaxy pulsed. To mortal eyes, it was a rent in reality. A jagged storm of warp lightning and impossible shadows. But to Kyle, now bonded to the seat of hunger, it was a breathing thing. It hungered, and its hunger was shaping his every move. In the strategium of the Vigil of Midnight, the holomap shimmered with fresh astropathic intercepts. A great imperial force was on the move. The Solar Crusade fleet, a hammer of warships and armies drawn from the Segmentum Solar itself. Its commander was Lord Admiral Lucerne, a man whose victories were legend. The fleet's approach was deliberate, each jump precise, the noose tightening around Kale's warband. The warlords gathered again. The Iron Warrior was first to speak, voice harsh through cracked vox grills. "They will pin us and crush us." The logical choice is retreat. The Emperor's child, lounging with predatory grace, laughed softly. Retreat? Against such a glorious adversary? I would rather die with my blade in his throat than live to watch him fade into the mists. The World Eater simply slammed his chain axe into the table, gouging deep into the steel. "Let them come." Kale said nothing. He was listening, not to them, but to the steady thrum of the abyss in his mind. It was not afraid. In fact, it was pleased. That night, the voice whispered, "Do not flee. Do not crush them. Feed them to me." Kyle understood. The crusade was not an enemy to destroy, but a lure to be drawn into the wound. Their strength, their ships, their souls, all would become part of the abyss's feast. The next day, Kale began to shape the trap. He ordered the warband to raid a string of border systems. each attack leaving behind survivors to send panicked calls for aid. The pattern was designed for Lucerne to see, a line of atrocities leading toward the wound in space. At first, the warlords grumbled at the deliberate inefficiency. The Iron Warrior muttered about wasted resources. The World Eater chafed at the lack of all-out slaughter. But as the Imperial fleet pursued exactly along the path Kale laid, doubt turned to grim amusement. The hook was set. Weeks passed in fire and blood. On the forge moon of Helbracht, Kale ordered the destruction of its orbital docks, but spared its planetary defense guns, knowing they would slow the crusade just enough for his fleet to position itself. On the mining world of Sarthis, he left behind caches of captured Vox codes, so Lucerne could track his movements more easily. By the time the crusade reached the final system before the wound, the trap was almost closed. The vigil of midnight floated at the edge of the abyss. The wound loomed ahead, a yawning void where the stars bent and bled light into its depths. Warp storms curled like tentacles from its heart, licking at the hulls of nearby ships. The other warlords gathered on Kale's bridge, each staring at the roiling nothingness. "You mean to fight there?" the Iron Warrior demanded. "It's suicide. Navigators will be blind. Gunnery will be worthless." Kyle cut him off with a cold smile. "That's the point." The Imperial fleet arrived in perfect formation, a wall of steel and fire. Their banners shone with the aquila, their prows adorned with saints and angels. Lord Admiral Lucerne's flagship, the Invictus Rex, burned brightest of them all. His opening Vox transmission was terse. "You are surrounded. Power down your weapons and prepare for boarding. No quarter will be given." Kyle replied with a single phrase, "Then come and take me." The battle began with brutal clarity. Lances flared, torpedoes streaked across the void, and ships on both sides died screaming into the warp. But Kyle did not press the advantage. He fell back, always toward the wound. The abyss howled in his mind, eager, impatient. Lucerne's fleet followed, discipline unbroken, even as the void storms began to tear at their formations. Vox channels filled with distortion. Navigators reported impossible readings, whole constellations shifting in seconds, space itself folding and twisting. Finally, Kyle gave the signal. His fleet split into two wings, revealing the full gaping mouth of the wound. The Invictus Rex and the Crusade's vanguard drove forward, directly into the shimmering darkness. At that moment, the abyss struck. It was not a weapon in the human sense. It was presence, a sudden expansion of reality itself. The void storms erupted, swallowing ships whole. Hulls twisted into grotesque shapes, turning inside out as their crews screamed in voices not their own. Gellerfields collapsed, spilling warp spawn into the corridors of proud Imperial vessels. The cries for aid were cut short as the wound pulled them deeper, not into death, but into consumption. Kyle watched from the vigil of midnight's observation deck as the flagship itself began to burn with unnatural fire. He could see Lucerne on the command bridge, rallying his crew even as the abyss clawed at the glass behind him. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the impossible distance, and Kyle almost felt pity. Almost. Then the flagship vanished into the dark. Silence fell. The Imperial fleet was gone, drawn screaming into the wound. The abyss was sated, for now. Kyle felt its satisfaction wash over him like a tide of molten metal. The other warlords stared at him in a mixture of awe and terror. None spoke. Kyle finally turned from the viewing glass. "We have broken their spear. Now we take the rest of the galaxy." But in the deepest corners of his mind, he knew the truth. He was no longer leading the war. The abyss was, and its hunger was only growing. The air aboard the Vigil of Midnight was heavy, thick with a pressure that had nothing to do with the ship's failing life support. It was as if the abyss itself had seeped into every rivet and cable, making the very act of breathing an act of submission. The fleet had bled the sector dry over the last 3 months. Hive cities reduced to ember fields, orbital stations torn apart and left drifting, the screams of billions trailing like ash in their wake. But the voice was not sated. Kyle stood in the strategium, the hololithic map before him a grim red sprawl of dead worlds. The gathered warlords ringed the chamber, their armor still marked with the dust and gore of their latest campaign. The Iron Warrior warlord, Vardek, leaned over the display, one gauntleted finger tapping the next marked system. One more strike, and the sector will break. The Imperium will abandon it. The Emperor's child, Serene, smiled thinly. And yet we are told to wait. The voice is patient. Too patient, Kale's gaze never left the map. Patience is not its nature. It is waiting for something, that something revealed itself hours later. The voice came to Kale alone first, whispering into the hollow of his skull. The offering is incomplete. Blood is not enough. Flesh is not enough. Give me one of your own. Kale's jaw tightened. One of your own. Not a prisoner. Not some nameless slave dragged from a burning city. It wanted a leader. That night, Kyle walked the lower decks, away from the warlords, away from the arguments over strategy. He found the World Eater champion, Garrix, seated on a pile of chain axes, his breath misting in the cold. You look like a man with a decision to make, Garrix said, voice flat. Kyle studied him. If the voice asked for you, would you give yourself? The berserker laughed, not with humor, but with the raw madness of the nails in his skull. If it promised me an endless war on the other side of the veil, I'd go willingly. But it won't ask me. It'll ask you to choose. When the next war council met, the voice made its demand known to all. The air grew sharp with tension. Vardek was the first to speak. This is folly. It means to weaken us before the final strike, Serene's eyes gleamed. Or it means to raise one of us higher. Sacrifice, transformation. I've seen it before in the eye. Not all who are devoured are destroyed. Arguments broke like storms, accusations flung, weapons drawn. But Kyle silenced them with a single raised hand. I will choose, he said. They sailed to the heart of the dead sector, to a world the Imperium had never claimed, where the soil was black glass and the wind whispered in an alien tongue. There, the chosen offering was brought forth. Kale had made his decision without announcing it, and when he stepped forward, every warlord stiffened. It was Serene. Her smile did not falter, even as the Iron Warriors bound her in chains. I wondered, she said softly, if I would die by your hand or rise because of it. They took her to the altar, a jagged shard of obsidian rising from the earth, thrumming with the same pulse as the abyss. The voice filled the air, its sound now a crushing weight on the chest. Blood given, flesh taken. Will offered Kyle drove the blade into her chest himself. The ground shuddered. The sky split, revealing a swirling vortex of red and black. Serene's body dissolved into light. No scream, no struggle. Only the slow, deliberate unraveling of a mortal shell. When the last fragment vanished, something else stepped from the vortex. It had Serene's face, but her eyes burned with a light that was not her own. Armor fused to flesh, voice like molten glass. She bowed to Kyle. I am the herald, she said. The abyss is coming in full. The warlords knelt, not to her, but to what spoke through her. Kale knew then that their war was no longer about worlds or the Imperium. It was about preparing the galaxy for something far older, far hungrier, and far closer than anyone had dared to imagine. And the price of Ascension had been paid. The vigil of midnight no longer sailed alone. From the moment Serene returned as the herald, vessels began to gather. Ships that had been lost for centuries, fleets swallowed by the Eye of Terror, nameless constructs shaped from black metal that reflected no starlight. They did not hail, did not signal. They simply joined formation, each one turning its prow toward the same destination the herald whispered into their minds. Kyle stood upon the bridge, watching as the ragged fleet grew into something monstrous. Every day more joined. Every day the herald's presence deepened. She was no longer entirely flesh. Her voice carried like a song in vacuum, her movements smooth and deliberate, her eyes reflecting the abyss itself. She spoke to the warlords without raising her voice. We march on the gate. The gate was a myth, a story traded by renegades in the shadow of warp storms, an ancient construct older than the Imperium, said to be a passage to a realm beyond even the warp's reach. No one had ever found it, no one who claimed to had returned. Vardek, the Iron Warrior, frowned. If it exists, it is guarded. The herald's lips curved faintly. It is, and we will burn the guardians from it. From that moment, the campaign became something far more deliberate. No longer did they strike randomly. Each raid, each slaughter, each sacrifice was aimed at breaking the network of bastions that shielded the gate. The defenders were not Imperial, nor Xenos Kyle had ever seen. They were tall, robed, their armor faceless, their weapons silent beams that turned steel to ash. In their wake, they left no survivors. Kyle began to notice the changes among his fleet. Men who had fought beside him for decades now murmured strange phrases in their sleep. Symbols began to appear, etched into armor, painted onto bulkheads, drawn in blood on the decks. They pulsed faintly in time with the herald's voice. One night, in the Strategium, Kyle confronted her. What lies beyond the gate? Her gaze slid to him, and for a moment he thought he saw the old Serene beneath the abyssal fire. Freedom. For us, for those who survive. It was not the answer he wanted. The next 3 battles were like storms tearing through calm seas. The enemy fought not with desperation, but with cold, measured purpose, as if they knew every move the fleet would make. In the 3rd battle, Garrix the World Eater was struck down. His body turned to a brittle statue of glass before shattering to dust. The herald did not slow. When they finally reached the outermost bastion, the scale of it dwarfed every fortress Kale had ever seen. A sphere of black stone floated in the void, larger than any moon, its surface covered in vast moving patterns. Glyphs the size of continents shifting slowly like breathing skin. The herald stepped forward on the command deck, her voice carrying to every ship. This is the first seal. Break it, and the path will open. The battle that followed was chaos made flesh. The defenders bled light instead of blood, their screams warping into waves of static that battered the mind. Kale's ship rammed one of their great vessels, boarding parties carving through corridors that bent like bone. And then, silence. The seal cracked. The black sphere split down the middle, spilling forth a light that was not light at all. It bent space, warped metal, made flesh crawl. In its depths, Kyle saw cities that floated on rivers of fire, and skies torn by living storms. The herald turned to him, smiling like she had when they first met. One more seal, Kyle, and then we walk through. He nodded, but inside a cold weight settled in his chest. because in that glimpse of the realm beyond, he had seen something watching back. Something that did not wear the herald's face, but knew his name, and it was waiting. The fleet drifted at the edge of the fracture in space where the first seal had been broken. The black sphere was gone, dissolved into motes of darkness that spiraled inward toward the shimmering wound in reality. Through that wound, faint pulses of alien radiance spilled into the void, each one accompanied by whispers in a language Kale's mind should not have understood, yet somehow did. No one slept now. Not truly. The men closed their eyes and saw visions, cities inverted upon themselves, seas made of glass and bone, and towers of living flame. Some woke screaming, others woke smiling. The herald stood on the bridge of the vigil of midnight, eyes closed, breathing as if the void itself filled her lungs. "It is near," she murmured, her voice carrying to every deck through channels Kale hadn't ordered open. "One more seal, and the path will be ours." The path. That was how she described it now. Never freedom, never victory, only the path. And yet, the closer they drew, the more Kale felt the pull of something vast and ancient threading through his thoughts, as though it were weaving them into a pattern he could not yet see. The journey to the second seal was short, but the void between was wrong. Instruments failed. Vox traffic dissolved into laughter or weeping. At times the stars themselves shifted, forming constellations no human chart had recorded. When one of the escort ships broke formation to investigate a drifting beacon, its Vox feed carried only a single image back, a burning crown suspended over an endless pit, before it vanished entirely. The seal itself was not a sphere like the first. It was a ring impossibly vast, forged from a metal that absorbed all light. It turned slowly in the void, and within its circumference was nothing. Not space, not stars, only a flat, depthless absence. Vardek studied the scans with a grim expression. "It's not guarding something," he said. "It is something." The herald stepped forward, placing her hand on the display as if she could feel it through the hololithic projection. "The second seal is the Guardian's crown. It will not yield without a tithe." Kyle's stomach tightened. "What kind of tithe?" Her gaze slid to him, and the corners of her mouth curved faintly. "Life. Blood. The willing surrender of a captain and his crew." The warlords erupted into argument, but Kyle heard none of it. His thoughts were caught on a single detail. The way she'd said, "willing." The fleet could take many things by force, but it could not compel true surrender. And yet, as if answering the unspoken challenge, one voice broke the clamour. "I will give it," said Joras, captain of the Pale Ember. His eyes were glassy, his voice calm. "The crown has called me since the first seal cracked. My ship is ready." The ritual was quick. The Pale Ember moved toward the crown, its engines dimming as it passed the ring's threshold. No one on the fleet's channels spoke. Even the herald was silent. Then, without warning, a ripple passed through the void. The ring blazed with an impossible light, not bright but total, like a sun that burned not with heat but with presence. The Pale Ember was gone, not destroyed, not broken, simply erased, as though it had never existed. The nothing within the ring shivered, and then it split open like an eyelid. On the other side, Kyle saw it, a colossus of shadow and gold, crowned with the same burning halo from the lost ship's final transmission. Its form was half statue, half living thing, its face an expressionless mask of obsidian, eyes like eclipsed stars locked on the vigil of midnight. The herald bowed low, her voice almost reverent. "Guardian of the path, we offer the seal to your keeping no longer." It is broken. The thing did not speak, at least not aloud. The sound came inside Cale's skull, a deep, resonant toll like a bell rung in the marrow of his bones. 2 seals shattered. 1 remains. Then the vision was gone, and only the ring remained, now dead and inert. The path beyond stretched like a wound through space, leading deeper into the unknown. The herald turned to the fleet, her smile serene. "One more step, my warlords. Then we pass into eternity." But Cale's mind was still ringing with the Guardian's unspoken words. Not the ones all had heard, but the ones it had whispered to him alone. "Kyle Veyron, son of the void, when the last seal falls, your soul will be mine." And for the first time since the herald's return, Cale wondered if breaking the gate was not victory, but surrender on a scale too vast for mortal minds to grasp. The void ahead was darker than the abyss they had crossed. No stars, no radiation echoes, no gravimetric signatures, only the deep, unlit silence that made men think of coffins sealed forever. The vigil of midnight moved at minimal thrust, the rest of the fleet trailing behind like predators wary of a trap. Kyle stood alone in his quarters, the Guardian's whisper still gnawing in his skull. "When the last seal falls, your soul will be mine." He had told no one, not Vardek, not even his most trusted lieutenants. In the quiet, he tried to convince himself it had been a hallucination, the product of too many days breathing recycled air and listening to the herald's honeyed sermons. But every time his mind strayed, he felt the echo of that voice, cold and inevitable. The herald summoned him to the strategium. She stood at the center dais, illuminated by the ghostly green glow of the hololithic map. The path ahead was displayed, a thread of shimmering nothing leading toward a single point, suspended like a tear in the fabric of reality. "The 3rd seal," she said, "the gate's true heart." Kyle studied the projection. It was unlike the other seals, no sphere, no ring, just a jagged shard of black crystal rotating slowly, each turn shedding ripples of distortion that warped the space around it. At irregular intervals, the shard flared, and Kyle swore he could see shapes within, pale figures pressing against an invisible barrier, their mouths open in silent screams. "What happens when it breaks?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. The herald's gaze was unreadable. "Then the gate opens, and all that was promised will be ours. And if it stays sealed," she tilted her head, "then we remain what we are, dust and bone, bound to the slow death of this galaxy. I did not return to you to watch us rot, Cale." Vardek's voice cut across the room, low and dangerous. "We've lost too many ships already. The Pale Ember, the Glass Mourner, half the scout flotilla. You ask for more blood, but never say why." The herald smiled faintly, "Because the truth would shatter you before the gate ever could." That night, Kyle found Vardek waiting in his quarters. The old warlord's eyes were hard. "I don't care if you still believe her lies, but I've been digging into the records. This gate isn't a passage. It's a prison." Kyle froze. "For what?" "I don't know. No one does. But every time the seals weaken, the void changes. The old archives speak of whole sectors gone silent, planets burned from the inside out. The thing behind that last seal isn't salvation. It's hunger." The weight in Kyle's chest deepened. He told Vardek nothing of the Guardian's claim on his soul. But now the shape of the trap was clear, and he was already caught in it. When they arrived at the 3rd seal, the void itself recoiled. The shard hung alone, larger than a moon, its surface veined with cracks that bled faint silver light. Those trapped shapes within moved more urgently now, their faces contorted in terror. The herald stood at the observation deck, her hands clasped as if in prayer. "We are the knife that will cut the last thread," she said to no one in particular. "Beyond this lies the realm where death is only a word, and time kneels to its masters." Kale stepped forward. "And the price?" Her eyes flicked to him. "You already know it, Kale Veyron. You've felt it since the first seal fell. The gate has chosen its herald. Not me. You." The words hit like a blow. The Guardian's whisper had not been a threat. It had been a prophecy. He was the tithe. Vardek's hand went to his blade. "We end this now." He never finished. The herald moved faster than human eyes could follow, her palm striking his chest with a sound like shattering glass. Vardek collapsed, blood on his lips, eyes already dim. The shard began to flare, its cracks widening. Kyle felt something vast and cold pulling at his soul, tugging him toward the seal. He could fight it, or he could surrender and let the gate open. The deck shuddered. Alarms blared. Somewhere behind him, the fleet's guns opened fire. Not at the seal, but at the vigil of midnight itself. Someone aboard had chosen mutiny. The herald's voice was calm, even over the chaos. "Choose, Kyle. Your life for eternity, or your death in the dust of this dying galaxy." The light from the seal grew blinding. Kyle stepped toward it, every nerve screaming. Somewhere deep inside, a decision was forming. One that would either save them all or damn them beyond salvation. And then, with a sound like the cracking of the universe itself, the third seal began to break. The moment the third seal broke, the void screamed. Not a sound. Sound could not exist here, but a vibration that rippled through bone and blood, a pressure that pushed into every cell until Kale thought his flesh would split apart. The black shard disintegrated into dust and light. The shapes trapped within did not escape. They dissolved, their outlines tearing into fragments that were devoured by the brilliance. The light did not fade. It deepened, becoming a terrible radiance that revealed the thing beyond. The gate was not a door. It was a wound. A tear in reality, edges raw and weeping streams of silver fire. Beyond it was a darkness richer than the deepest void, a place where shadows moved with purpose. Shapes vast as continents stirred there, their movements slow, deliberate, like creatures waking from aeons of slumber. The herald stepped forward, her expression one of reverent awe. "Behold," she whispered, "the throneless realm." Kale's breath caught. The Guardian's voice flooded his mind, no longer a whisper but a command. "Step through. Take the crown. Give me your soul, and I will make you eternal." Vardek's body lay behind him, blood pooling in slow, drifting spheres in the ship's low gravity. The fleet's comms were chaos, mutineers, loyalists, and terrified men shouting over one another. The vigil of midnight was under fire from her own sister ships, while the herald ignored it all, eyes locked on the wound in space. Kale felt his feet moving without his will. Each step toward the gate made the pull stronger, the cold seeping into his chest until his heart felt encased in ice. The Guardian's presence coiled tighter around his mind, blotting out thought. "You are already mine," it said. "Cross, and you will never feel fear or loss again. All empires will kneel to your shadow." He could almost see it. Worlds burning in his name, fleets bowing in orbit, his banner draped over the ruins of dead civilizations. The image was intoxicating. But then his eyes fell on Vardek, the man who had followed him into every hell, who had challenged him when no one else dared. Vardek had not feared the herald. He had feared Kyle losing himself. Kyle stopped walking. The herald's gaze snapped to him, her serenity gone, replaced by fury. "What are you doing?" I'm ending this, Kyle said, his voice steady despite the storm inside his head. The Guardian roared in his mind, a blast of rage that felt like claws tearing at his thoughts. The herald lunged, her hands glowing with that same glass-shattering power she had used to kill Vardek. Kyle met her strike with his blade, not to kill her, but to drive her back long enough to act. The Vigil's main reactor controls were locked behind 2 layers of security, but Kyle didn't need authorization anymore. He was captain, and the Guardian had already tried to claim him. Its connection was a 2-way channel. He fed it everything he had, not surrender, but defiance, and forced that energy into the ship's heart. The herald realized too late what he was doing. No, you can't. The reactor overloaded, a sphere of light blooming at the ship's core. The detonation would tear the Vigil apart, and with it, the gate's anchor in real space. The last thing Kale saw was the herald's face, not fear, but betrayal, as if she had truly believed he would join her. Then the light consumed everything. For a heartbeat, he felt himself falling, not into fire, not into void, but into a place without direction or time. The Guardian's voice was there, a final whisper, before it faded into nothing. You think this frees you. You have only delayed the feast. Then there was nothing. The Vigil of Midnight, the Herald, the Gate, all were gone from the stars. The wound in space sealed, leaving only an empty patch of void, silent and unmarked. And somewhere, in that silence, something vast shifted, waiting. The Vigil of Midnight never returned. Not a scrap of her hull, not a drifting body, not even the faintest radiation signature marked the place where she had stood before the wound in reality. The system's coordinates were now an unremarkable piece of the void, a patch of space that swallowed sensors and refused to yield its secrets. Yet word spread. Rumors moved faster than any warp courier, carried by traders, deserters, and those who claimed to have seen the event from far-off augur stations. In the drinking dens of the outer colonies, they whispered of a ship consumed by a hole in the stars, of a captain who defied a god, of a woman who walked in the void and commanded shadows. The Navy called it an accident, a reactor breach during a skirmish, nothing more. No official records acknowledged the Gate, the Herald, or the Guardian's voice. The fleet logs were scrubbed, officers reassigned, and the few surviving mutineers quietly retired to isolated postings far from the core worlds. But silence is never perfect. Encrypted fragments of Kyle's final transmissions appeared in the data black markets of Port Varos. Scholars in the forbidden academies of Dalakar tried to decode them, claiming that buried within were coordinates to the throneless realm. In the cathedral libraries of the Machinate faith, priests argued over whether the Guardian was an angel of the first light or a demon cast out before creation. And in a monastery high above the clouds of Karth, an old friend of Kale's, a woman with one eye and a scar like a lightning bolt across her jaw, lit a candle for him every night. She never believed the Navy's version. She knew he had died fighting something greater than any warlord or fleet. But not all believed he was dead. On the rim of known space, a salvage crew exploring the wreckage of an abandoned orbital found a single, unmarked data core. When activated, it played only a short message, distorted by static. If you hear this, stay away from the gate. It's not a door. It's a mouth. The voice was Kale's, and though the recording ended there, a faint whisper lingered in the background. Too soft to make out, yet enough to make every technician who heard it pale and shut the core away. The galaxy moved on. Wars flared elsewhere. Empires rose and fell, and new borders were drawn in blood and greed. But in the deep void, far from any star, There were still nights when navigators reported dreams of a wound opening in space, and shadows that called them by name. Some ignored them. Some steered their ships far from the source, and some could not resist, because hunger never dies. It waits. It watches. And somewhere beyond the veil, in a darkness richer than the void, something smiled. For the feast was not ended, only delayed.